The twin queens took their seats, and the human audience poisoned the crown. The lights of the Grand Aurelia Theatre glowed like 1,000 captive suns. Red velvet seats curved upward in perfect symmetry, every row filled with nobles, diplomats, generals, and observers from a dozen allied realms. The air shimmered with perfume, power, and expectation. Everyone present knew they were witnessing history, not a performance, but a judgment. In the center of the front row sat the twin queens of Alarion. Identical faces. Identical golden hair flowing over dark ceremonial armor. Identical posture, perfect, controlled, regal. Yet the galaxy feared them not because they were twins, but because only one of them had ever needed to speak for wars to begin. The queens who could not be touched. Queen Seraphine on the left wore the crown of radiant accord, an ancient artifact rumored to amplify truth and command loyalty. Her blue eyes were cold, calculating. She ruled through law, contracts, and diplomacy sharp as daggers. Queen Veolyra on the right wore no crown but needed none. Her power was visible in the way others leaned away from her presence. She ruled through fear, decisive force, and a legacy written in blood-red treaties. Together, they had ended rebellions in days. Together, they had toppled empires. Together, they had ordered tonight's assembly. Behind them stood Director Holt Arman, human liaison officer and political advisor assigned by the Interstellar Coalition. Tall, broad-shouldered, expression unreadable, he served officially as their neutral interpreter. Unofficially, he was there to make sure humanity survived the evening. The reason for the gathering. The twin queens had announced a public verdict. Humanity stood accused of ideological contamination, a crime undefined, unmeasurable, yet deadly in empires built on obedience. Human refugees had spread across Alarian systems for decades, bringing with them chaos, free speech, dissent, ideas that refused to bow. Uprisings followed. Soldiers hesitated. Citizens questioned orders. And worst of all, some began to call the queens unnecessary. Tonight, the queens would decide humanity's fate. Exile, subjugation, or something far worse. The silence before the crown speaks. The orchestra pit lay empty. No music played. This was no show. Queen Seraphine lifted one pale hand. The theater fell into absolute silence. Citizens of Alarion, she said, her voice carried flawlessly to the highest tier. You gather not for entertainment, but for resolution. Beside her, Veolyra's gaze swept the audience, assessing, judging, memorizing faces. Seraphine continued. The human presence has become disruptive. A murmur rippled through the audience. Holt stiffened behind them. Humans inspire defiance, Veolyra said coldly. They weaponize choice. Where they settle, loyalty weakens. Somewhere in the upper seats, a human woman clenched her fists. Her child leaned against her side, trembling. Seraphine turned her head slightly. But before judgment, she said, we will hear reason. She gestured. Director Arman. Speak. A human among queens. Holt stepped forward into the theater's golden light. He did not bow. That alone caused whispers. I will not defend humanity as flawless, Holt said evenly. We're loud. Emotional. Terrible at following orders we don't respect. A few nobles scoffed. Veolyra's lips curled faintly. But we don't obey out of fear, Holt continued. We cooperate out of belief. And when belief disappears. You rebel, Veolyra finished. As you always do. Holt met her gaze. As you once did. The theater gasped. Seraphine's fingers tightened on the armrest. Careful, human, she warned. History is written by victors. Then you should remember, Holt replied calmly, that Alarion was not always ruled by queens. The truth the crown tried to forget. Silence fell heavy and sharp. Holt took a step closer. Before Seraphine the diplomat. Before Veolyra the conqueror. There were free city-states. Councils. Votes. Ordinary voices. Seraphine's eyes flashed. Those systems collapsed into chaos. Because fear replaced trust, Holt countered. The same thing happening now. Veolyra stood abruptly, her presence dominating the room. You were summoned to explain humans, she growled. not rewrite our origin. Holt didn't retreat. You didn't summon me, he said quietly. The twins froze. You summoned them. Holt gestured toward the audience. Your people. They're watching. And for the first time, they're wondering if queens are necessary at all. A pulse ran through the crown on Seraphine's head, reacting to truth. The poison was not human. A noble stood, a high-ranking lord of the inner circle. This is treason, he barked. The human manipulates. No, Seraphine interrupted slowly. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but something worse. Realization. The crown confirms, she whispered. He speaks truth. Gasps erupted across the theater. Veolyra stared at her sister. The crown is flawed. The crown cannot lie, Seraphine said. Holt exhaled. Your people aren't poisoned by humans. They're starving for choice. The audience shifted. Some nodded. Others wept silently. Veolyra's fists clenched. For centuries, she said, voice raw, fear kept us safe. And now? Holt asked. It keeps us alone. The twin queens divide. For the first time since childhood, the sisters did not sit in perfect alignment. Seraphine turned toward Veolyra. If we condemn humanity tonight, we silence ourselves next. Veolyra's jaw tightened. And if we don't, the throne may fall. Seraphine removed her crown. The sound of metal leaving her head echoed like thunder. Then let it. The audience erupted into chaos, shock, shouting, disbelief. Veolyra looked at her sister as if seeing a stranger. You would risk everything, she said hoarsely. Seraphine replied softly, so would our ancestors. The human stands last. Weapons powered on. Inner circle guards moved. Holt stepped between the queens and the audience. If you choose fear now, he said, you'll rule ruins. Veolyra stared at his back. A human. Unarmed. Standing between power and consequence. Slowly, agonizingly, she sat back down. Stop, Veolyra ordered. The guards froze. She looked out at the people she ruled. Then at her sister. Then at the human who refused to kneel. Announce it, Veolyra said quietly. Before I change my mind. Seraphine raised her voice, clear and ringing. By decree of the twin thrones, she declared, humanity is absolved of all charges. Furthermore. She paused. The governing structure of Alarion will be revised. The theater exploded. After the curtains fell. That night, history fractured. Not through war, but through courage. The twin queens remained rulers, but no longer absolute. Councils were formed. Voices invited. And humanity? They stayed. Not as conquerors. Not as saviors. But as a mirror, one that showed an empire what it could become. As the crowd filtered out, Holt stood behind the twins once more. Veolyra glanced back at him. You poisoned my throne. Holt smiled faintly. No, your majesty. He met her gaze. Your people did. And this time, she didn't disagree.